The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Huck Finn is a boy of around 13 or 14 years who lives in St. Petersburg, Missouri with a cruel father Pap. Huck Finn and his friend Tom Sawyer find a box of gold in a cave during one of their adventures. Judge Thatcher invests the money for Huck Finn, who begins to live with a kind woman, Widow Douglas. She tries to educate him and teach him about right and wrong. However, Huck does not like this kind of a life and ultimately flees from her home. One day, Pap meets him, wanting to extract some money out of him. When he cannot get his way, Pap kidnaps him and takes him to his cabin in the woods. One day, when Pap is away, Huck fakes his own death and escapes from the cabin. Now we will read the excerpt from Mark Twain's famous novel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, in a graphic novel form that tells us what happens when Huck sets off downriver and the word about his death goes around. As he paddled downriver, he hoped that Pap would be fooled by his tricks, but he did not care. He had escaped, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly free. He tied up at Jackson's Island. About 12 miles downriver, a passing ferry boat was shooting a cannon, which was supposed to make a dead body rise to the surface. From his hiding place, he could see everyone on the ferry: Judge Thatcher, the widow, Tom Sawyer, Pap, and Tom's Aunt Polly. They all thought he was dead. He felt bad in a way, but he was so happy to be free that he did not care. After that, he set up camp on the island. He made a tent out of blankets and caught a catfish for supper. For a few days, he really loved his freedom, but after a while, he started to wish he had some company. One day, he stumbled upon a smoldering campfire. He was not alone. He was so scared and hid in a tree. He stayed there 2 hours and his heart kept on pounding. When he calmed down, he hiked back to where the campfire was, and to his surprise, there was someone sleeping near the fire. It was Miss Watson's slave. He was terrified. It took a while to convince Jim that Huck wasn't dead. It wasn't until he went out some meat and cooked them breakfast that he finally calmed down. Jim had run away the night he heard Huck was dead or killed. He hadn't brought any food with him and had been living on wild berries. Huck told Jim how he had faked his death. Now he was rid of Pap and the widow and the money. Huck asked Jim why he had run away. He had a family and he knew that Miss Watson treated him well. Jim said that Miss Watson wanted to sell him downriver in New Orleans for $800. That's why he ran off. His plan was to swim across the river to Illinois, which was a free state, but it was too far, so he settled for the island. He was afraid that Huck would tell someone where he was, and Huck said that he wouldn't, and we swore an oath to keep each other's secrets. This worried Huck some. He didn't want anyone to know that he had helped a slave escape. Huck had a reputation to uphold and did not want to be called an abolitionist. At the same time, he did not want Jim to get caught. Now he kept on thinking about this problem. It looked like rain, so they moved into a cave Jim had found. For the next several days, it poured and the river rose higher and higher. When the rain finally stopped, they found the river filled with debris from the flooding. They captured a good sized raft of logs, and as they were trying it up, a whole house came floating by. They paddled out to it in the canoe. In the house, they found some silver coins, a tin lantern, a few girls' dresses, a hatchet, and some candles. In one room, Jim made a grim discovery. They decided to leave the island, but first they had to make sure it was safe. It put on one of the dresses and he took the canoe over to the Illinois side of the river. Huck, who was dressed up like a girl, knocked on the first door he came to, and a nice woman let him in. She told him it was dangerous for a girl like him to be out alone at night. She said that a young man by the name of Huck Finn had been killed by a runaway slave named Jim. Jim had not been seen since the night of the murder. There was a $300 reward for the runaway. Some people believed he was hiding on Jackson's Island. Huck got out of there as fast as he could. When he got back to the island, he lit a fire as a decoy while Jim loaded the raft. They set off downriver with the canoe in tow. It was pretty dark. They tried to stay in the middle of the river to avoid being seen. At daybreak, they tied up to a sandbar and covered the raft with some cottonwood branches. Jim built a teepee, means a tall round tent, at one end of the raft. He put some dirt down on the floor so they could light a fire to cook their meals and keep them warm on cold nights. They sailed at night and tied up every morning. It was a pretty good life. One day, they came upon a wrecked steamboat. They decided to investigate and tied up the raft at one end of the wreck. As they snuck on board, they heard voices. Jim was scared, but he told him that they would be all right if they kept quiet. They found some cigars, a spyglass, and some blankets. but they nearly got caught and only just managed to get away. Huck was glad that they had escaped and glad Jim was with him. He was beginning to like Jim a lot. He was starting to see that he wasn't just a slave but a real person like him. They were headed for Cairo, Illinois, where the Ohio River joins the Mississippi. But it was pretty foggy, and they sailed past Cairo in the dark. Jim was upset, but Huck was secretly relieved. Huck was worried about Miss Watson, who had put up the $300 reward. He wanted to keep his promise to Jim, but Huck was feeling guilty about helping a runaway slave. Jim said once he was free, he would save all his money so he could buy his wife and child. Then they would all be free. He said if he couldn't buy them, he would have to steal them. This upset Huck, and his conscience Huck's conscience began to bother him some more. Jim was a good friend, but he was breaking the law by helping him escape. He did not care about the reward, but the problem weighed heavy on his heart. Huck told Jim he had to go ashore. He was planning to turn him in, but as he paddled off, Jim called out to him, and his words cut him like a knife as he stated that Huck was the only white man who ever kept a promise to him. Suddenly, in the dark, Huck saw a small boat coming towards him. The man in the boat asked who was on the raft. Huck stuttered a bit and then he lied. Miss Watson was right about him. He was a liar and doomed forever. It felt good to be back on the raft. But his joy was short lived. Suddenly, a steamboat appeared through the fog. And the next thing he knew, he was in the water. He swam for shore and walked quite a way before he found a house. It was a large cabin, a nice home that told him the people who lived there were well off. The Grangerfords were decent people and invited him in. Mrs. Grangerford gave Huck some dry clothes that belonged to her son Buck, who was his age. He had his first home cooked meal in a month, corn pone, buttermilk, and corned meat. But Buck and Huck became friends, and they had fun hunting and fishing. But from time to time, Huck wondered what had happened to Jim. Was he still alive? Now, let's discuss the meaning of a few words that have been used in our lesson. First, smoldering, that means burning slowly, producing no flames. Second, pounding, that means beating strongly and quickly because of being afraid or nervous. Third, oath, that means a formal promise. Fourth, debris, means broken and scattered remains. Fifth, grim, and here in this lesson, grim means unpleasant. Sixth, decoy, that means a trick to mislead someone. Seventh, teepee, that means a tall, round tent. Seventh, eighth, wrecked, means badly damaged. Ninth, snuck, means moved quietly and secretly. 10th, conscience, that means an inner voice that tells you whether your actions are right or wrong. 11th, stuttered, means spoke nervously. 12th, well off, means rich. And 13, cornpone, that means bread made from corn or maize. Now here we are ending with the story. Thank you, children.